It's no secret that writing can be lonely work, but does it really have to be? Whether you're full-time, part-time, or just starting out, you'll get insights into the tricks, tips, and production habits of writers from every level of the biz. From best-selling authors to those launching their first novels, you're sure to be in the company of friends as we encourage great writers to divulge and share their secrets. This is the Great Writers Share podcast with your host, best-selling author, Daniel Wilcox.
Hello and welcome to episode number 63 of the Great Writers Share podcast, where every week we hijack an hour or so of time from some of the kindest and hardest working writers around today to join us on the show and discuss everything that makes them tick, roar and bounce. My name's Daniel Wilcox and today's date as of recording is Monday the 23rd of November, and I'm going to dive straight in with my personal update. So in fiction news, The Other Side Anthology, which was the first collection of short stories from my company, Devil's Rock Publishing, went live around the middle of October. It's difficult to remember the exact date because a lot happened in October, but I'm incredibly proud with what was brought out, what was created, what the authors have included, and just how it sits on the shelf. Like the hardback came through, the paperback came through, it looks fantastic. I think that there's not a thing on there that I'd change at all. And I'm excited because myself and a co-conspirator are currently planning the next anthology from Devil's Rock Publishing, looking into what the theme's going to be, how it's going to work, the submission guidelines, the dates, all that kind of good stuff. So keep an eye out if you're a horror author or if you know someone who's a horror author who might be interested in submitting. That will be over at www.devilsrockpublishing.com, where you can find out all the information very, very soon. On top of that, When Winter Comes, which was my first ever serialized story novel series, which I put fingers to keyboard on around March of this year, although the story stretches back to 2016 when I originally found the notes for the conception for this story. And it's been a journey. It's been a hell of a journey. I love it when a story tells you what it needs to be, because originally I'd planned for a minimum of 7 episodes, probably around 9 episodes. And I just wanted to experiment. I wanted to see if I could turn a horror story into a serial. I wanted to see if I could stretch the form, find a way to manage sort of shorter releases while I'm, doing other work and getting involved with other projects. And the serial ended up being 6 episodes, which totals in at about 130,000 words. So it's quite a beefy novel once it's all collected together. And it is the only season that's going to come out in this story. The story is capped off. It rounds off. It's exactly what it needs to be, which kind of brings you back to the reason I started in the first place, which is that horrors are very difficult to serialize or put into a series because everyone dies at the end. But ultimately, the book came out better than I planned, than I ever thought I could. I've had roaring feedback from anyone who's read through the entire series. I'm really happy with how the end rounded off. And the next steps for that are, for me, I've got a piece of cover art that is basically going to be a box set version of the book. And in a few months' time, I'm basically going to be re-editing. I'm going to be looking through doing audiobook and all that stuff and doing a big launch of the collection as a sort of collected, serialized novel. I'm very much looking forward to having that on my bookshelf, considering as well that the art is beautiful and it's nothing that I'm going to be showing the world anytime soon, but it is, I'm very, very, very happy with what the cover artist came back with. So yeah, all that to look forward to. And which that leaves me in a bit of a quiet slump at the minute because, Christmas is coming up. This time next week, I will be moving house. So I'm trying to give myself deliberately less to do. I've got sort of ghostwriting to do. I've got other projects I'm currently working on. So for me, I'm in a bit of a fiction slump. But what I have done to get me through this quieter time, I guess, is I've bought a piece of cover art that I just fell in love with instantly. And I am currently percolating on a novella that is going to represent this story that I'm going to put together. And I have no real expectations for this one, which is different because, I've spent the last couple of years sort of chasing as much commercial success as I can in order to sort of pay bills and bring in all the income and stuff. But this book, I am going back to my roots. I'm going to just tell the story that I want to tell. No expectation, no, this might be a bad idea, we'll see. No sort of a market view. It's going to be my book, my idea. And I don't know, I do love it when you find a piece of art that grabs you and tries to make you tell its story. So that will be to come. I'm sure I'll share more updates on that as it comes in the future. In non-fiction news, I've been working very, very hard over the past few weeks, few months, in order to maximize the offering that I'm providing in terms of services for authors. So by the time this episode airs, hopefully all of my information will be over at danielwilcox.com. If not, it'll be at danielwilcox.me, soon to transfer over to .com. Longer story. Listen to the Next Level Authors latest episode to understand my rationale behind that. Long story short, over at danielwilcox.com, there will be information there about book coaching, which I will soon be offering to authors. Book coaching, for people who haven't listened to the Jenny Nash episode of The Great Writers Share, is essentially a sort of extended program in which you work directly with someone who has been in the author game for a while, and you have weekly sort of meetings and calls and deadlines and tasks, and it's sort of an accelerated program to help you move forward with your writing. So it's a good way to practice your craft, just get into the biz, particularly if you're going to be an indie author. And I do currently have a waiting list over at danielwilcox.com. So by all means, if you're interested in that, find out more information, check it out. I am also offering smaller services, one of those being a short story studio edit, in which I take short stories and I edit them for people. As someone who is a co-founder of the Other Stories podcast and definitely played a part in sort of the rising success of that show to its 6 million plus downloads, I feel like I'm fairly qualified to know what makes a good short story. So if you want to check that out, that's also at danielwilcox.com. And I will soon be having information on a public boot camp, which for people who haven't listened to the last few months of the show, I did offer, and currently I'm in the throes of, a boot camp that I'm running with 18 authors, in which I am providing Zoom sprints. We're doing daily motivational messages. We've got a Facebook community. And the idea of that is basically to build this community for everyone to reach the end of NaNoWriMo and hit the 50,000 word target for everyone that just wants to get to that point. But I am currently reviewing and looking at a way in which I can bring bootcamp as a more regular feature to people. So if people are tired of writing alone and you feel like you want to be a part of something with some people and sort of get out of that little bubble of loneliness, which I know that is definitely there in the beginning when you start writing, then keep an eye out for more information on that, because that will be coming pretty soon. And the last thing to note for me, my productivity book is still under works. It's stretching and becoming probably one of the most researched books I've ever worked on. I am incredibly excited at what it will be, but it definitely needs a lot more work. So that's all I can update you on at the minute is much heavier research. I've got a direction, I know where I'm going, but it's just making it happen. So keep an eye out for that. Today's guest is someone who I am incredibly excited to have interviewed, and it is the wonderful Josh Malerman. For people who are unfamiliar with Josh Malerman and his work, he is the author of the novels Bird Box and Malorie, as well as a whole slew of others. Bird Box has been translated into a Netflix blockbuster with Sandra Bullock, with John Malkovich, with Sarah Paulson, and it was a hit success. I've read the book, it's fantastic. I've read Malorie, it's also fantastic. I've seen the film, it was also fantastic. And I'm a big fan of Josh and a lot of what he does, so I really enjoyed having the chance to sit down with him. And we discussed some things that I think are a bit more non-conventional, because I know that Josh has been on a lot of interviews talking about how Bird Box works, how Malorie came about, all these kind of background information about his writing journey. And one thing I hadn't really seen was us take the angle of the artist and his life as a writer, as a musician. He is also one of the lead singers of the High Strung, which is a very popular band. And yeah, we went all over the globe on this, and it's an interview that might actually be one of my favorite interviews I've ever given. It's one of my favorite interviews that I've ever sort of been on the other side of. I'm very thankful, Josh, if you listen to this. Awesome, thanks for coming on. We can definitely do this again sometime. But yeah, we cover what it is to be an artist. We cover the power of writing the end on your first draft. We cover what it means to be a prolific, and we do go a little bit at the end into sort of touching on some of the Malorie and Bird Box stuff. So by all means, stick around. It's going to be a very meaty episode. No new patrons this week, but for anyone who wants to get more value from the show and be able to ask any upcoming guests any of your questions, as well as getting early access to episodes without ads and into our Slack group, then head on over to www.patreon.com/Great Writers Share, where you can get more from the show for as little as just $1 a month. And that's patreon.com/Great Writers Share. Thank you to everyone who answered our question of the week. And our question of the week this week was, do you consider yourself an artist? And Laura Kay started kicking us off in true Laura style by saying, actually, I consider myself more of a god, creating life, destroying it, playing with my creations to entertain myself, which I loved. And yes, that's what we do as fiction authors. Holly Line, who says, I definitely consider myself an artist. I have other creative outlets and skills as well as writing. I studied art at A-level. I sing, play a little of several instruments. I've done drama and film making. I draw, do hand lettering, and I get to write for a career. Definitely an artist in that sense. Yanni says, I would consider myself an artist. Like Holly, between writing and my artwork, I'm a creative by nature. Meg says, I guess I do consider myself an artist, but I prefer the term creative because that seems to better express the fluid and organic nature of this career/lifestyle for me. Creativity is in every breath I take. Art is in everything I perceive. A story is waiting in all things to be written, performed, painted, experienced. It is a true honour that I have been able to forge a career telling stories through my writing, art, and creative endeavours. Absolutely love that. I could not agree more. Natal Roberts says, definitely all creation is art. To me, an artist is a person using whatever their medium is to express their interpretation of what they think, see, hear, or feel. I work with text because that's my happy place. What I do on the surface is write pulp fiction. Scratch that and I find my examination of the human condition writhing beneath. Why the human condition is a mass of writhing tentacles in my mind, I don't know. Ritu and Julie both say, hell yes. Jasmine Plate says, it took me a while before I could stop focusing on perfection. I always used to believe I wasn't skilled enough to call myself an artist, even though I was always creating in one way or another. But yes, I am most definitely an artist, flawed and proud. And finally, Andy Conduit Turner, who was our guest on the show a couple of weeks ago. Check that episode out. In the strictest sense, I'd agree I am, but with a little asterisk and a note explaining not like in a visual creation sense. So thank you everyone for answering this week's question. To answer next week's question, head on over to the Facebook group or join us on Patreon and get involved there. But now, without any further ado, let's dive into the interview with the one, the only, the global best-selling smash sensation, Josh friggin' Malerman. Josh Malerman is a New York Times best-selling author and also one of two singer-songwriters for the rock band The High Strung, whose song The Luck You Got can be heard as the theme song to the Showtime show Shameless. His critically acclaimed novel, Bird Box, has been adapted into a Netflix feature film starring Sandra Bullock, John Malkovich, and Sarah Paulson, and was also nominated for the Stoker Award, the Shirley Jackson Award, and the James Herbert Award. The sequel novel, Malorie, was released earlier this year to roaring success, and his books Black Mad Wheel and Goblin have also been nominated for Stoker Awards. Joshua Malerman, welcome to the show.
Hello, that intro was amazing for me. I was like, it was like a reminder for me. I was like, oh yeah, wait. Yeah, you do have a best-selling novel, and oh my God, you do have a movie made. Yeah, that was nice.
It's got to be, it's got to be something that's so, I don't know, I'm trying to put myself in that position because obviously you do have a lot of credits behind your name. Like we listed the awards there. Obviously you've had things translated into film. You've got the band going as well. There's so much going on. And I think the beginning of how I want this interview to start is very, very much digging into what the definition of an artist is, because obviously you've got the band, you've got the books, you've got the sort of film adaptations. So let me ask you, what does it mean to you to be an artist in today's world?
Wow, I have never been.
It's a big question to start with, I know.
But one of my favorites. I've never been asked it, but one of my favorite subjects to discuss. The way I see it is, if you want to be an artist, you have to finish works of art. And this is something that I came to young enough where it was frustrating because I wasn't finishing. I was writing songs, and that definitely got me through it, this period, but I wasn't finishing the novels that I was starting. So between the ages of like 19 to 29, I tried my hand at like 4 novels and failed. I'm putting quotes around failed, because all I really mean by failed is I didn't finish them. I didn't care if they were right or wrong or good or bad or long or short, whatever it was. I just didn't finish one. And somewhere in there, I started thinking, if you're going to be an author, you have to actually write a book, buddy, you know? And it was a kind of a daunting realization. You're writing songs. Okay, this is good. But that translates immediately over to what is an artist, because, and I'm not even just talking about like the eye of the beholder or everything's objective, but there really is no right or wrong to it, right? And if you look on the spectrum, let's say you're setting out to write a novel and you're like, oh, am I good enough? Okay. And if you check out like the spectrum of what you've read, what you've experienced, and you go from like the absolute height, the pinnacle, to the worst, and there's thousands of books between, I think it's safe to say that you feel like you would fit somewhere on that spectrum. So it would be incredible if you got beyond the pinnacle of what you think that is, And it would be maybe even more incredible if you fell below what you consider to be the worst book you've ever read. So to me, you take all those people as artists, you take all those people as serious. They wrote novels. This guy's an author. This girl's a filmmaker, whatever it is. And so to me, then it literally just comes down to just writing it, just finishing one, just making a movie, just making an album, whatever it is. So as simple as that answer, and as long as that answer is, it really just comes down to an artist is someone who finishes works of art.
I love that so much. And that resonates a lot because a lot of the authors that I speak to, 9 times out of 10, they're people that have tried in the past but never quite reached the end. And one thing that I preach to a lot of people is, if you're looking to get into this kind of profession, there is nothing more powerful than writing the end on the first draft and knowing that you can finish, because that is such a huge hurdle for people to even get to. The idea of writing however many pages of a work and hitting the end is just phenomenal. And for me, I don't really care what happens after that. I can put every part of my journey down to me writing the end on that first novel.
Could not agree more. So at the end of those 10 years and the 4 failed novels, I had some crazy idea that I was going to write 2 at once, because I figured, and one was a very lofty idea, which actually sounds appealing to me again now, but hasn't for a long time. And then the second idea was sort of this real psychosexual horror novel, real fast paced thing. And I sat down to, the idea was real fast. The idea was you start one, if you get stuck in it, you turn to the other one. If you get stuck there, we turn back. So we can use, instead of getting stuck and then no, never come back to it, I can use these 2 ideas for each other, against each other, for each other. So I made it like 2 pages into the loftier idea. And I was like, shoot, I don't know what's going on. And I transferred over to the dirty one and just exploded through it. Like something like, what was it? 91,000 words in 28 days.
Wow.
All handwritten. And this was all in an all-night coffee shop outside of Detroit. And I would go at midnight and write till about 4 a.m. It was winter. It was December of 2004 or something. And I'll never forget when getting to a spot where I was like, wait a minute, I know how this ends. And I'm near that spot. Like I was on page like 270 or something. And I made it to 300 in one of the failed novels. And I'm like, but wait a minute, I actually know that this stops at this scene that's coming up. Like, and it's exactly what you're saying. The feeling was indescribable. I've never felt something like it. Not even, well, I mean, it's just different. But seeing Sandra Bullock as Malorie was a whole different kind of like, but like that feeling of like, there's just nothing like it. And it's exactly what you said. Part of you doesn't even really give a shit what happens after that. Mm-hmm. What's the difference? Like, yes, I can make this better now. And that was one of the beauties of handwriting it, is that it forced a typed out rewrite. Because if you're going to enter it, you're not just going to enter it verbatim. You're going to make changes, right? So it forced a rewrite. But so it was like, okay, I'll make this better. Where's it going to get published? What do you mean? Who cares if it even gets published? Let's do another one and another one. And so my early run with all of this before Bird Box got picked up was, and Bird Box is included in this run, some 9-10 novels or something, like when I met my agent and all that I never once tried to shop. I guess I rewrote Wendy because it was handwritten, like I said, whatever. But so the point is, like, there was never a sense of what do I do with these. Now, a couple of things to keep in mind. At the time I was in a rock band, I still am. And we were playing our shows or playing our songs every night in a different city, right? So there's some artistic gratification there. Like we were, I didn't have to find that in the books that I was writing. And we weren't making money in the band. We started to maybe at the very end in a better way, but not like, not where we're like, oh, we're retired, or, I mean, for some reason, I never saw the books with this urgency, with dollar signs in my eyes, these kind of things. It just seemed like them being finished was enough. And now I have in the crate behind the screen, there's 33 rough drafts in there of novels. 9 of them are out in the world. Well, yeah, 9 of them are out in the world. And I still feel the same way right now, despite Malorie going through rewrites and movie for Bird Box and movie for House of the Head. And I still feel like those 33 novels, that's it right there. That's the stuff. And it's the same thing that you were saying, like you almost don't even care what you do care. You want them to do well. And I couldn't, believe me, I could not be more grateful than I am for every single thing happening with all this. But ultimately, that's the stuff.
There's so much I really want to dig into, and I'm conscious, obviously, like time restraints and stuff. But like, I think there seems to be such a purity around you and your process. I mean, to have a number of novels written that, obviously, I think everyone who writes a book wants some kind of success in some way and to obviously be picked up. But like you say, you had your gratification artistically with your band. So what was it specifically that dragged you into writing, even though you were expressing yourself in other ways?
So me and the other songwriter, Mark. So Mark Owen and I are the two songwriters in the High Strung. And we were always talking about, we want to write. And we wrote some, found in love with songwriting together. We learned how to play guitars together, all this stuff. But all the while we were talking about how we wanted to write books, constantly talking about it, and even tried experiments to force ourselves to, where we would come home from work on a Friday. We lived together, lock the door, and you weren't allowed to leave till Monday with a completed story. Like you literally were not allowed to leave the apartment. Story, like stuff like that. So you would bring home like sandwiches and whiskey, you know, and you're like, oh, we're not leaving, you know. But I was writing like poems, which that's really a loose word for what whatever, those are embarrassing, but like emo poems and short stories before writing songs. So even like from the word go, it's always been like trying to write in some fashion or another. But then it was really when I met Mark and when we started writing songs together, and then you start putting out albums, right? That you start to see, like, if we can put out an album, why can't this novel idea be realistic? Why can't this happen? And I mean, I remember reading that Ken Kesey had written all of Cuckoo's Nest. And then when he was done, he was like, oh man, what if this was told from Chief's perspective instead? And then he started over and wrote it again. And I thought, when I read that, it sounded like someone said they ran 5 marathons in a row. Like I couldn't comprehend what I had just read. I'm like, what do you mean he wrote a whole novel and then wrote it again no, I couldn't grasp it. And then with Bird Box, there were, it gets picked up. The rough draft was really a wild incarnation of that book. But anyway, it gets picked up, and there were enough notes that had to do with, the rough draft had like 14 housemates, and the final book had like 7. There were enough notes that suggested either you remove characters and pretend this other character said himself, or you just write this stuff from scratch and you know how it is. So I did the same exact thing. Bird Box got picked up, and I saw the notes that they had, and just really in terms of limiting the characters. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to write it again. I'm not going to sit here and try to squeeze every chapter to change the names and change it a little. Does that sound like, let's just try it again. And that was a real eye-opening experience for me of how, well, I guess I would call it, you're in writing shape, right? So if you're not finishing novels, if you're not writing regularly, the concept of writing the same novel twice is bonkers.
Yes.
But if you are, and if you're doing it every day and you're working on it and you're rewriting and you're working on another idea, it's not all of a sudden. So that's another thing, because I feel like we're sort of now satelliting what makes an artist, right? Mm-hmm. And there is being in artist, like shape for it. Well, that can mean that you get wasted every night and paint, every night or whatever. It's not the same as being on the treadmill, but there is a certain like artistic muscle that has to be in shape or something as well.
Absolutely. I will also state, just for listeners, if you do hear some thumping in the background, it's my next door neighbors, and I'm not Edgar Allan Poeing and having someone just dead beneath, just a heart beating beneath my floorboards. Like,
I was gonna be like,
there's someone that shut up, Philip.
Did you move the camera to the floorboards?
Yes, and carpeted over. I'll move the camera. I'll show people just to be sure. But obviously, you mentioned there about the first draft of Bird Box, and from what I've read, and if this is accurate, that was a whirlwind 26-day sprint, similarly to your experiment with Wendy, in which that was handwritten and that was just in one go. Bird Box was 26 days, mostly italics, barely any dialogue tags, and with 5 finches flying above your head. You seem to have this knack for creating unique situations in which to write those first drafts. Is that something that you deliberately set up, or does it just kind of happen in that way for you?
I have never thought about that before. And the first thing that comes to mind is Carpenter's Farm was written live at the beginning of this pandemic. I don't know if you know of that one. I posted it to the website in installments. That would be a real example of what you just asked, like making a the writing of the rough draft being in extraordinary circumstances. Believe you me, there are easier things than writing a novel live.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I do feel like that. Like Goblin had that to it. Unburied Carol was a super. I wrote Unburied Carol was the fastest I've ever written a novel, and it's my favorite one. Which that always sounds weird when an author says that, but I don't care. It is my favorite one. It was. I think I wrote Unburied Carol in 15 days, and the rough draft was like almost 90. It was like 5,300 words a day from day one. I mean, from day one, like boom. Usually it's like day one's like 500, 1,000. You're like, all right, I introduced Jonathan or something. And then day two, you're like, okay, now he has brown hair. And you're like starting to build up, you know? And then you're rolling by the end. Unburied Carol from the minute the gate opened was just an explosion. So I do, and again, it just all keeps circling the first question, which I love. Because if we are saying that the rough draft is what matters, right? Or the finishing of the rough draft, putting the end on the book, right? Well, shouldn't that experience, or isn't it nice if that experience is joyful? Isn't it nice if that experience is a rush? If it's out of body, if it's transcendent, if you're like into it, you know, like you're like jamming or something, like stoned without being stoned. I can't imagine writing a book stoned, by the way. That would be the worst thing. But like, so like those, and that says something too. Like I'm saying to you, the good stuff's in that trunk right there, this huge crate. It also is saying like the good experiences of like, you're not caring about, how right or not, you're just like in this world and you're going for it. So I do think, I would say this, it's not intentional that the rough drafts have become sort of extraordinary experiences for me, but it's also no secret to me or it's no surprise to me that they have been, because to me, that's the most like joyful moment of the process.
Yeah. Have any of your works been written over a longer period and with a bit more deliberation, or are they all these kind of explosions of energy and an idea?
So there was two. One is kind of like two explosions because I wrote, it's the two longest ones I've written. So one, it's called Bring Me the Map. That one, I wrote 80,000 fairly steadily. And then I ran out of gas. And a year later, I wrote another 80,000, the second half of it. And I had never done that before where I took a break between. I wrote other stuff between, but I was like, all right, now it's time to go finish Bring Me the Map. And did another 80,000. But the real one, the one time that I was steady about it, and I have the book here, and I almost want to show you, but it wouldn't, I do want to show you because even though nobody can see this, I feel like you have to. So this is called, I'm holding up a giant stack of paper, everyone.
Wow. Giant stack indeed, yes.
It's called Ghoul in the Cape.
That is a beast. Wow. Is that like size 25 font?
Yes, that's good. No, it's 1,100 pages. And I went into it knowing that it was going to be a giant. And so I said to myself, it was almost like counterintuitive or something, but I said to myself, okay, look, typically when you get rolling, you're doing at the least 2,500, 3,000 a day. And at the most, like Carol, like 5,300 a day. But with this one, I think if you're going to get through this one, I think you got to do like 1,000 a day and spend a year on this.
Yeah.
You know, it's going to be like, it's over 300,000. And I think that there was something that was like, that sounds counterintuitive. Oh, you're going to write like your longest book ever. You're going to take your time and write it slower. Well, the reason why is I just can't imagine maintaining that Bird Box or Carol pace for 1,100 pages. And it freaking worked. Like the months are passing and the numbers start, 3 months pass and you're at 90,000. You're like, I'm almost like a third of the way through this story. A couple more months, you're about halfway. You're like, this is freaking working. And so that's the one time that I took it in a steady, like intentionally, hey man, like don't overextend yourself. And not to use sports analogies or whatever, but in the same way, if you're running every day, If you run 10 miles one day, you may not run the next day, right?
Yes.
And then if you don't run the next day, maybe you won't run the next day. So I'd rather have ran that 1 mile every day, and that's what Ghoul in the Cape was.
And that's such useful advice, because a lot of my listeners are people who are first-time authors who are struggling to get those words down, and to even think about writing something so large seems impossible. But if you can nail just 1,000 words a day, or even just 500 words a day, and chip away at it constantly, then that's when you really build up that body of work that you can then start to put out there. And obviously, even though you've hit success with a lot of what you're doing, and you're prolifically writing all these books, you're still using that method to write these much larger works, which I find endlessly fascinating.
Yeah. So, okay, think about what you just said, like 500 words a day. It almost sounds like, if you're rolling, 500 words could, like, literally could be like 15, 20 minutes, or it could take time. Depends on how serious you are about those words and how likely they are to remain, right? But the point is, like, if you only did 500 a day, so okay, Ghoul in the Cape was 1,000, that's 300,000. So let's say you did half that, 500 a day. I mean, in a year's time, by the way, less than, it would be 10 months time, you would end up with like 550 page rough draft. And like, so I always think about that. I'm like, time is going to pass either way.
Yes.
Why not market with these sessions, these daily sessions? And when you turn around in 10 months, let's say, to the person starting today, I mean, can you for doing almost nothing different? You write 500 words a day and you have 550 pages. And that all sounds a little clinical. That all sounds a little strategic. Formulaic. Yeah. And then and I'm like, that's not where I'm coming from. It's really not. But sometimes numbers can help. When you're like, because a book just can sound so daunting, like it used to me, like Kesey's thing. Like, it can sound, oh my God, 300 pages, but you just do this little bit. I mean, and then here we are. Ghoul in the Cape is a mammoth thing that is, by the way, a special edition. This hasn't been announced anywhere yet. A special edition of this book is coming out. I don't know when. I have to rewrite this stack for him.
That's A4 pages, I'll add as well. When we said it's 1,100 pages, that's A4 pages.
Yeah. So he's putting out like the full 1,000 page like edition and everything, and it'll be like 1,000 of them made or something, and that's probably coming out like in a year and a half or something. But I got to still rewrite it for him. But I had a long discussion, and this is an interesting thing for writers to hear too, that there are different kinds of rewrites depending on the book itself. And this is the same with music. I like, and me and the publisher both like, that Ghoul in the Cape is loose, that it meanders, that it has, that it breathes, that, Bird Box is a bullet story, like they can't, like, boom, like everything is united, one note story. That this one's not like that. So with Bird Box, the rewrite could, in effect, take longer than like a 1,000-page book, that you're mostly just, okay, he used to be called John, now you're calling him Jim. That's bad, like a lot of that kind of stuff happens. Like, wait, you haven't mentioned his sister in like 500 pages, that kind of thing. But it's going to be like a gentle sort of a just read through, make sure it's all together. Whereas the rewrite of the newest book I wrote for Del Rey, that one will be like a detailed every kind of beat thing. And that's interesting too. Like not all rewrites are the same.
And all of this links me very, very nicely to another point that I wanted to hit, which I love it when this happens in an interview and you circle around something that's going to come up anyway. But if you'll indulge me for a minute while I read some of your words back at you, because as I said just before we started recording, I've recently finished Malorie, which was a fantastic follow-up to Bird Box, which I will also add right now that I think Bird Box was the first book in a long time which refueled my love of reading. And I read it back it was 2018, so obviously a few years after it was published, but I'd seen it floating around a lot, and it was one of those I kept seeing pop up, and then it became part of a readers group that I'm involved in. And It was one book that I blitzed through in 2 days while I was traveling around to see friends in sort of Manchester and other places, and I just couldn't put it down. And that hasn't happened to me in quite a few years. And it's not because other books are terrible, not at all. Like, I've enjoyed books that I've read, but it's been a while since one has really sort of like just grabbed me and pulled me in. So having recently read Malorie and seeing that you've managed to deliver that twice, I think, number one, that's a sensational thing. So I highly applaud you on everything you've done there.
Man, thank you. I thank you so much for all that. I real fast, I wanted to say about that, like, at first talking to Del Rey and my agent about doing Malorie. And then we can get to that deeper if you want later or something. But when I sat down to write it, I was like, okay, here we go. And the minute it started, it was like, oh, like any pressure or anything was just gone. It was like, I'm just happy to be with Malorie again. Like, there's just some characters that come around, I think, for authors that, how do you explain it? Like, there's no, oh, remember, she would be like this, or she would, you know, she would, it's just like, naturally, this, I know her. I got her. I know her. Yeah.
It's got to be such a nice feeling. And I definitely want to get to some of that stuff. But I will say for listeners, if we don't get more to some of the Bird Box Malorie stuff, you did do a fantastic interview on the This Is Horror podcast. And Michael David Wilson is a good friend of ours, and he was on the show recently. So I'll definitely link to, I think you did 3 episodes sort of in sequence that you put up there. So if people want to find out more about that, it's definitely in there. I'll link to that.
I love you guys.
No worries. But yeah, at the end of Malorie, you wrote a little afterward. And as I was reading through it, there was some part that really, really pulled me in. And I'll read this full paragraph and then we can kind of discuss, but it is quite long. So like I say, please do indulge me. What the prolific understands deeply is that you can start anywhere in a prolific's catalogue and work your way in either direction from there. What the prolific cherishes about all things is not the singular work of art, but the canon, the oeuvre, the arc of a creative mind unable to stop itself, the waves created by endless ideas. Have I mentioned that the prolific believes anything he or she does at any time is a snapshot of the whole? That to wait years between projects is akin to having misplaced 1,000 photographs from an era that, in hindsight, was much cooler than it felt at the time. Now, for me, that clicked on so many levels because I'm known more within the indie community as someone that writes very, very fast. So I put out a lot of product in different places. And for me, I was getting to a position in which, well, number one, I do want to slow down a little bit and focus more sort of and go a bit more deeper into projects because I feel like personally I'm writing a bit too fast, but that's a whole different conversation. But to read something like this and to know that there are other people out there that feel that sense of urgency to create something that captures a moment in time and doesn't feel the pressure of a book needing to be a perfect monument of who a person is, that it's shifting, it's changing, it's morphing as time goes by. I mean, I know that when I interviewed Jonathan Jazz, he mentioned a few times about the art of the prolific, but talk to us a little bit more about that idea and how you feel about that, because it's something I've never seen so succinctly put and so eloquently put as you have.
Man,
we're getting deep here.
Oh yeah, no, this is, again, these are like my favorite subjects. So I have numerous friends that have book ideas, and then I see them getting stuck, and I keep going back to the moment I finished a first book, which was, like I said, there was the lofty idea that I was like, this is the one I'm trying to write, and then the crazy horror story that I was like, this will help me write that one, essentially. Left the lofty one behind and went nuts into this one, and I see friends that are stuck on their first novel, and I start to feel like I have a feeling that you think that novel has to represent you in full. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what's going on here. Every character, every street name has to represent you in full. And what you don't realize, and you can't know if you're prolific or not until book 2, right? I mean, you can't, if you only wrote 1, you don't know until you write that second one, like what you're capable of in that way, right? But the minute you do have that second book, then you start to realize, okay, Wendy was more about sexuality. Goblin was more about like a character, like sketches or whatever. And that was the second book I wrote, Goblin. The Wolverine line, I love that book. That's the third book I wrote. The Wolverine line was just a spiral into a guy that was just whatever, like horribly afraid of an experience that happened to him. And so it was like all these different things already in the first 3 books. And I started to realize that any spotlight on what I was trying to, or what I'm trying to say or represent or whatever, is already divvied up now amongst 3 books. So to understand, where he or she is coming from, and in this case, me, Wendy wouldn't represent me in full, neither would Bird Box. In fact, sometimes it's incredible to me that Bird Box is the breakthrough one because it's sort of the flattest one. It's like the straightest one. Mm-hmm. And I'm like a super scatterbrained, like Carol is much more like my personality, like going from like vignette scene to scene, like multiple characters and bizarre setting and bizarre circumstances. But so, okay, now if you put Bird Box and Carol next to each other, someone might not even, without my name on it, I don't think somebody would recognize those as the same author. I don't think so. And so, and I think you could even do that with Inspection. And then it'd be like, I have no, like, these are 3 different people. But what that means to me is that a single work of art isn't what represents you. It's the canon that you just read. And then, but the beauty of that is the second you embrace that and the second you really live by that, well, then shit, man, anything goes. Like, because now you're saying you could literally write a novel where not a single character agrees with any way you see the world at all. Like, you don't have to, it's almost like, okay, so there's that element, the dispersed spotlight, right? Or numerous spotlights or whatever it is, but removing the spotlight from one work of art. But then there's also like the sense that like the novel, unlike a rock band, there's nowhere to hide. Okay, so my friend who's worried about representing himself in full in a novel, well, guess what? You're going to, like, you can't hide in a novel anyway. Like if you and I were given the same exact scenario, literally the sun comes up, Jonathan wakes up, he goes to the bathroom, he goes downstairs. Just already how you tell that and I tell that, like we're worlds apart already. And the same exact moment happened. There's just no hiding it. And if you, even to the point where if you did write a novel that was, what's the right word? Unlike yourself or unlike your worldviews, that would probably be understood by someone reading it. That either this was a farce or sarcastic or irony or something would be understood there, because the real you is impossible to hide in a novel. And so that might sound like scary to someone, but what it should do is lift the pressure of feeling like you have to figure out a way to express yourself. By writing at all, you are expressing yourself. I remember before a show that the High Strung had in Chicago, there was a poet named Fax Douglas who liked to read his poems on stage before the band would play. And he's legendary around Chicago. He would do this for, what do they call, Wilco and other bands. And he did it for the High Strung. And I remember talking to Fax and I was like, I don't think I had written, I had already written a couple books by then. And I was like, I want to write the great, like optimistic, like the optimist novel that years from now, if somebody was like, oh, you need to read Malerman's blah, 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 if you're wondering how to, get through this moment or something. And Fax turned to me and he goes, isn't the act of writing it all optimistic? And I was like, yeah, shit, you're right. He's like, because doesn't it imply that it matters? And doesn't it imply that someone might read it? And doesn't it imply that there's meaning? And I'm like, yeah, thank you. Now I'm just going to keep doing what I was doing and let that all work itself out. So yes, 100%. I think that the ultimate beauty of the prolific is it ends up becoming the canon, the quilt, the body of work ends up representing you rather than just Bird Box, just Unburied Carol.
One thing that I found in terms of sort of researching you and just in previous conversations I've had with other writers is your name is often brought up into conversation as a very positive influence and someone who manages to remain humble despite obviously this global success that you've had with your films, with your books and everything else. The question I want to ask is kind of 2-part. Number one, how do you stay so humble once you have received this kind of attention in this industry? And number two, you seem to be a very active force in terms of holding a hand back to help people behind you on the journey come up as well. So what does that look like for you? How do you think about helping the others behind you, and how do you manage to sort of stay so grounded and humble?
Man, those are hard ones to dissect myself. I feel like one answer I have is that is the same way that you're approaching it too, where if you're all coming from a place of joy and love for writing and for books, then I mean, like if you it almost comes down to, again, that the real meat of the matter is in the rough draft. So anything that happens beyond that is like, oh my God, this is wonderful, this kind of thing. But I do wonder though, if I was 20 years old when Bird Box comes out and a movie is made and it's a hit, what would I be like by 23, 24? I don't know. I can't say for sure that I would be this, I would probably walk around like I fucking own the city or something. You know? I'd be like, yeah, everything I write is gonna be turned into like Sandra Bullock's and stuff and everything. Like I probably would have no real concept. I mean, maybe I'm not giving myself enough credit, but because I do think that most people I've met are coming from the right place, especially like authors, right? I mean, how many authors have you really met where they're like, my goal is to be world famous, or my goal is to make $1 million, you know? And while we all want these things to happen, and it seems like that kind of attitude can really help someone in, say, sports, you know? They give them some sort of like energized edge or something, like some chip on your shoulder or something like that. But I kind of have a rule, no V's in art, no validation. Meaning by success. So Bird Box doing well should not validate the other books or me or some career, should not be a victory. The writing it itself is the victory. Should not, nothing vengeful. If anybody ever said like something about you and you're like, well, now what do you think, motherfucker? You know, like, no, hold that back.
I've met those people.
Yeah, right. And then there's one more, but I can't remember the fourth V right now. It's in the newest book that I wrote, the 4 V's. But the point is like, I'm very aware at 40, like or 40 something, like be like, you know, let's not look at the success of Bird Box as it means, you know, there's no spite in that. There's no bad feeling. You're not wishing, you know, you're not glad that this happened, that someone else sees you, you know, succeed. Like, no. The joy, everything is in that rough draft. Anything that happens on top of that, just be grateful for. Literally everything that happens on top of that rough draft, just be grateful for. And so if that sounds humble, then I guess I am. And in terms of, so I don't mean, because I have a feeling you don't think this way either, but I just don't see it as reaching behind or down to like help someone, that kind of thing. And like I see sometimes online, someone will say, oh, I only punch up, or I'll never punch down. And I'm like, what the fuck is up and down anyway, man? Like what? Because this guy sold more books than you, or this guy sold less, or whatever. The guy, Dean Koontz, might be the coolest, most sensitive, nicest dude in the world. I have no idea. You know, if I punched up at Dean Koontz, is it, oh, that's okay. And then for all I know, he could send him into a mental spiral for 6 weeks if you read that. You know what I mean? Whereas someone else that I was like, I'm not gonna punch down, or I'll never punch down. This guy could be the biggest turd burglar in the world. So I don't know. So I just don't see it as behind, forward, up, down, like to begin with. I just don't. Sometimes I do worry because I see like, what's the right phrase? I do see like people on Twitter that, and online that sort of present themselves as a little more aloof, you know, certain like writers, not distance from other writers, but just, they just seem a little more aloof or a little more, I don't know how to explain it. Whereas I feel like on online, I'm just like exactly like I'm talking to you right now.
Yeah.
And sometimes I worry, like, is that, you know, am I going to ruin any chance of mystique, or is that already like ruined years ago?
Yeah, no, it definitely comes across. There's definitely transparency when it comes to just the things that I've read about you, obviously other podcasts I've listened to, speaking to you now. It's all sort of one just authentic experience. Right. We would be doing a bit of a disservice if we don't touch on Bird Box and Malorie. And I guess one question that I have from my side is obviously Bird Box was originally published, if my facts are correct, in 2014. The movie with Sandra Bullock, which, by the way, was fantastic, came out in 2018, and Malorie has come out this year. How have you kept the momentum flowing between these different projects as they go on? Because obviously it's one large story and people are still invested and they love it and they love what you're bringing. Are you actively doing anything from your side to keep that momentum going?
You mean to keep the momentum of the Bird Box world, the Bird Box story, or do you mean writing in general? You mean the Bird Box story, right?
Yeah, more than the story, yeah.
Yeah, like that world or whatever.
Yes.
Dude, to make matters even weirder, the rough draft was written in 2006. So the real question is like, how the hell like have you, because to me, and I'll say this a million times, they're all the same to me. You know, I love them all. So I'm like, how the hell is this one? And you're like, woo, like, you know, I think here's the answer. Okay. Bird Box gets picked up, comes out in 2014 and did like what I thought was really fun and well in its first week, right? But by like New York Times bestseller standards, or really even by any major publisher standards, it was probably a disappointment when it first came out in terms of sales. I'm sure that it would have been whatever. The point is, the second week it did about the same. The third week about the same. The fourth week the same. Until now we're talking a whole year of that. And then it became like, wait, this is becoming interesting. Because Bird Box didn't sell like thousands of copies in its first 2 weeks and then sort of peter out or whatever. It's literally had this steadiness to it for an entire year. The first week to the last week. And then that year became 2 years. And that year became 3. Those 2 became 3 and then 4. And all of a sudden it was like kind of a strange thing that me and my agent would talk about regularly. Like, man, it's still doing exactly like it did. It never rose above a certain volume and it never went below a certain volume. It just stayed at this steady hum for like 4 years. And I attribute that to, I see Bird Box on a lot of lists of like horror novels to read. And also I think that Bird Box could, it's one of those horror novels that can step outside of the genre a little. Like to me, it's squarely horror, but it could step outside. It could be, Bird Box could go to a thriller party, I can see Bird Box drinking with like a thriller. Like it's gonna go home to the horror house, but it can go out for a night, So I think that like.
A one night pass.
Yeah, it's a one night stand and doesn't spend much time in the romantic comedy side of town, but I'm sure that she'd be welcome there too. So then I think that has something to do with it. It's a little bit outside the genre, and it was a word of mouth, and the horror scene like really propelled it. And for me, it was this incredible thing because I went to StokerCon in 2000. So the book wasn't out yet. I think it was 2000. It was right before it came out in 2014. I had never met anybody in the scene yet at all. I don't have a book out yet, but I had a box of 60 hardcovers of Bird Box that I was supposed to sell. And I mean, that you can make some good money off that if you think about it, right? Between 10 and 20 for each of these, and set up a table. And I'm looking at all these like tables set up. I don't know a single person there. I'm like, how am I going to sell these, man? So I was like, you know what? Forget it. Just don't even think about the money. And I just stood up and put up a sign saying free hardcovers. And all these people would walk up and then I would all of a sudden talking to them about Bird Box, and they write books too. And maybe they would give me one of theirs or whatever. And I met like 50, 60 people in like the horror world in that like hour. And I always cite that as one of the best decisions I ever made. And I'm not saying to an author, like, give yourself away for free. It just seemed like in that moment, it was the right thing to do. And I always think that there was some sort of seed work that happened there, because at the time, the head of the HWA, Rocky Wood, he was one of the people that got one, and he posted about it being a great debut, and that led to more people reading it. It just seemed like there was a steady flow to it. And then now couple that with the fact that there were announcements along the way, right? Netflix bought Universal optioned Bird Box before it came out. Netflix bought the rights to Bird Box from Universal. That's an announcement. Sandra Bullock gets on board 6 months later, whatever. That's an announcement. Sarah Paulson's on board. John Malkovich, it's directed by Suzanne Bier, who did this. So there was like regular things to talk about in the course between from book to film. It wasn't like the book is made and a month later there's a movie and now what do we talk about? There was this steady flow of like exciting advancements on the movie side. And then the movie thing happened, and that was just, that's a whole hour-long conversation in and of itself. Yes. And at that point, that's just set up for Malorie to come out. So I think that the answer to your question, how do you maintain that, is steady word of mouth, things to talk about, and that Bird Box maybe not transcends, but steps out of the genre a little bit too.
We are unfortunately getting very close to time, but I do have one main question before we go into a couple of Patreon questions. And that question is the same one that I ask every guest that comes on the show, which is, why do you, Josh Malerman, write? Now, Jonathan Jans had a very good answer, so hopefully you can top it.
I doubt it. I don't know. For me, it's like, it's such a thrill. It's so, I don't want to use the word fun because it's so much more than just fun. It's such a thrill. I don't know. I had one time where, where I was like drinking a lot with a bunch of drinking buddies. One time my ass, but anyway, they're in the middle of a real run. I was in the middle of a real run for there. And then there was a bar we all hung out at, and this girl showed up in the middle of the day to literally came to talk to me about maybe, and I was like 30 something at the time, that maybe I needed a plan B. And she's like, listen, like you're having the time of your life. You know, you're writing, God, I see online that you've written like 10 books or whatever. It was before Bird Box gets picked up and all that. And I'm like, and she's like, I think you need a plan B. I mean, at some point you have to think like you're one of the brokest people I've ever met. Like, what are you going to do? And the question was so bizarre to me, man, that it wasn't like, I didn't even get upset about it. It was so weird to me. It sounded like she could have been asking me like, I think that you need a third foot or I borrow one of your eyes, you know? I was like, I literally didn't understand what she meant. What do you mean like plan B? Like, this is what I do. This is like that. I'm going to write another one and another one, another one. And then Bird Box got picked up. And I can say with absolute certainty that if without HarperCollins, Del Rey, the movie, all that, I would be at 33 books now still. I was doing about 2 a year before all this happened, and I'm still at about 2 a year since it's happened. So why do you write? I mean, there's no intentional, I'm going to say this. But it's like, you know, I don't know. It's the most thrilling, joyous. It's like the place that I have the most, it's the most colorful place that I go to.
Fantastic. Beautifully put. We're going to just ask, I think we've got time for one question from our patrons over at patreon.com/Great Writers Share. And I'm going to go with Faye Trask, who says, how much say did you have when it came to turning Bird Box into a movie? Did you get to do anything neat, like meet the actors or visit the set?
Oh, yeah. So, okay, in terms of say, none. And that, think about it. Bird Box was optioned before it came out. It's my first book. So talk about no leverage. I mean, I literally had nothing out in the world yet. So we happily, joyfully said, take it away and do whatever you want with it. That said, we were welcome. I was welcome into like the first initial conversations with who the screenwriter was going to be. I flew out to LA and went onto the set to meet the producers, and they showed me storyboards. They would give us like updates, and we were welcome on set. And Allison and I, you know, watched a scene shot out in the woods, and then we watched the majority of a large chunk of the day was in like a sound studio, like on the Warner Brothers lot, like just like you'd see in the movie, like where Pee-wee was riding his bike around, you know, that kind of stuff. And like we're in one of those studios watching the scene where the car flips, you know? So Sandra Bullock and Sarah Paulson are like in the car, like, and then they, you know, it comes back and then it comes back and it comes back. It's all in this like, this like contraption, this machine. And at the end of that day, okay, real fast. So where they filmed was like, where they filmed was all like lit up, you know? And it was all like sort of shadows beyond that. And at the end of the day, we were there for hours. One of the main producers was like, hey, Josh, I want you to meet someone. I'm like, oh shit, I'm about to meet Sandra Bullock. I'm like so nervous, you know? And he like led me through a bunch of people and walked me out under those lights, and everyone else more or less, you know, sort of like was back in the shadowy area. And I was like meeting her under the bright lights of a stage. And she's like a full makeup and costume for the role. And I'm like,
Malorie.
I'm like, what is going on right now? I'm meeting Sandra Bullock like she has her own spotlight or something, you know? Like, yeah, it was an amazing moment. And then we were invited to the LA premiere. And this was actually kind of a big moment for me because the LA premiere, well, that was a huge moment for me, but the LA premiere was in the contract, actually, like Josh gets to go to the premiere, right? And then Allison and I had the time of our lives that night. Oh my God, just even thinking about it now. And then after that, they invited us to the New York one, and that one wasn't in the contract. And it really meant something to me. I was like, oh my God, they're like, we added to that party. Well, which we do. Allison and I definitely are adders. But I was like, we're definitely not subtractors. And I was like, we added to that, you know, to their party, and they liked us. And they went. So that was a huge sort of moment. So did I have any say? No, I also didn't care about that. In the same way with my band, I'm the songwriter. I bring a song. I don't tell Derek what to play. I wrote the song Bird Box, and they just played it however they wanted. Great, done.
Amazing. I love that. Okay, so we're going to go into a quick fire round now, which is 10 questions I'm going to throw at you as quickly as possible. At any point, feel free to pass. Otherwise, just go with whatever answer comes first. And if you're happy, I'll see you on the other side.
Okay.
Okay. Bram Stoker or Mary Shelley?
Say it again.
Bram Stoker or Mary Shelley?
Oh, man. Mary Shelley.
What's your go-to breakfast?
Eggs.
If you could sentence one person to live in their own personal quarantine for the next year, just to free the rest of the world, who would it be? Alternatively, go on, sorry.
Say it again.
I was going to say, alternatively, if you don't want to answer that, would you live in your own personal quarantine for 1 year just to free the rest of the world?
I think the answer to this one is too obvious. I do have someone in mind that should go in quarantine for a year, or maybe 50.
we'll go implied. The Beatles or The Who?
Oh, man, The Who.
Who's your go-to author to get you out of a writing funk?
Recently, it was Philip Roth.
What one musician, living or dead, would you invite into your hot tub?
No, but it sounds really weird. But I feel like my answer is Neil Young, but that sounds like the weirdest person. But I have so many questions for him about his songwriting. I guess Neil.
This is the best situation to answer those questions, just weirdly naked in a hot tub.
Right.
If a random fire destroyed all of your work and you were only able to save one story, which story would you save?
Oh my God. Ooh, that's the scariest question I've ever been asked in my life. One story. Oh boy. It's a novel called Pest.
What's your party trick?
My party trick? I can drink this drink in half.
What's one Christmas present you wished you got but you never received?
No, I did get that. I was about to say that I wanted the Constructicons. I would like. Man, I pass.
That's a stumper. If you could have one sentence, word, or phrase published on a billboard and viewed by millions, what would it say?
That is a really, man, this is not rapid fire stuff anymore. Now we've mentioned like really good questions. Something to the effect of get rid of the words good or bad.
I love it. And that is 10 questions, one bonus question. That was one bonus question. Where can my listeners find out everything about yourself and all that you're working on?
Everything is just Josh Malerman. So on Instagram, and there's only one L in Malerman. Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and also joshmalerman.com used to sort of be not that exciting necessarily, just updates, but now there's a free novel up there that I wrote live in front of people during the beginning of this pandemic. Carpenter's Farm is up there in its entirety. And one of my favorite things about that, there are no view numbers, reviews. Well, might be reviews on Goodreads or something. No view numbers, no likes, no dislikes, no comments. It's literally just the book in chapters up there. And there's something very pure about that to me.
Absolutely love that. So yeah, if you're listening, absolutely check out anything that Josh has worked on. You will be doing yourself a favor. And Josh, thank you so much for donating some of your time and coming on the show. It's been a genuine pleasure.
Yeah, same. That was incredible. Now all I'm thinking about is that Christmas present, even though I'm Jewish, by the way. Then maybe that's why I passed.
There you go.
I never really had that moment.
Well, if you do think of anything, throw it over and I'll pop it in the show notes. But for now, thanks again for joining me. And thank you everyone for listening. And I will see you next week. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Great Writer Share podcast. Next week, Holly will be joined by author of Fantasies, Mashups and Mayhem, Alicia Escobar. Don't forget you can get early access to every episode of the Great Writer Share podcast and the chance to ask upcoming guests any of your questions just by becoming a patron of the show. All you need to do is visit www.patreon.com/greatwritershare and support the show for as little as $1 a month. One more time, that's www.patreon.com/greatwritershare. Until next time.